The studio lights burned bright, but the air felt like it belonged to a storm. Millions were watching live as Denzel Washington and Donald Trump sat at opposite ends of a gleaming glass table, the kind that looked fragile enough to shatter with one wrong word. No opening pleasantries, no handshake, no forced smile. The host barely finished his introduction before Trump leaned forward, voice dripping with that signature mix of bravado and mockery. "Before we even start," he said, jabbing a finger toward Denzel, "I just want to remind America, this guy here? He's no patriot." The crowd gasped. Some cheered, some booed, but no one stayed quiet. The camera caught Denzel's face, still, unreadable, the kind of calm that only comes before a decisive strike. He didn't look at the host. He didn't look at the audience. His eyes locked on Trump. "You think wearing a flag pin makes you a patriot?" he asked, his voice low but cutting through the room like a blade. "A patriot defends the people, not just their own image." Trump smirked, waving a dismissive hand. "Spare me the Hollywood lecture. You make movies. I make America great." But Denzel didn't blink. "You make headlines. There's a difference." The studio fell into an uneasy hush. The host tried to steer the conversation, but the momentum was already set. This wasn't going to be a polite exchange. This was a collision. Trump leaned back, forcing a laugh. "You wouldn't know the first thing about service to your country." That's when Denzel leaned in, both hands flat on the glass table. "Service is telling the truth when it's inconvenient. Service is standing up for people who will never know your name. You wouldn't last a day doing that." The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in applause. The tension was no longer just in the air, it was in the blood of everyone in the room. And somewhere deep in the control booth, a producer knew, this was the moment the internet would not let go. Trump's smile tightened, the kind that looked more like a warning than amusement. He tapped the table twice, slow and deliberate. "You talk a big game, Denzel, but at the end of the day, you're an actor. You read lines someone else writes. I live the lines I wrote for this country." The audience murmured, sensing the shift. Denzel didn't rush to answer, he let the silence stretch just long enough to make Trump lean forward, hungry for a reaction. "You keep saying you lived for this country," Denzel said finally, his tone still calm but sharpened at the edges. "Living for the country means carrying the weight when it's ugly, not just standing on a stage when the lights are perfect." Trump scoffed. "Ugly? You mean like your friends in Hollywood who hate America but love our money?" Denzel tilted his head slightly, the kind of subtle movement that felt like a quiet dare. "I mean the single mother in Detroit working 3 jobs and still losing her home. The veteran in Tulsa who waits 8 months for an appointment at the VA. The teacher in Georgia buying school supplies out of her own paycheck. That's the America I stand for. Where's yours?" The studio audience roared, half in approval, half in outrage. Trump raised a hand to quiet the noise, but his voice was rising now, the composure cracking. "Don't lecture me about the American people. I've done more for them than any president in history." "And yet," Denzel shot back, leaning closer, "somehow, they're still struggling to breathe while you brag about how much you've done for yourself." The host's eyes darted between them like a referee deciding when to step in, but it was too late, this wasn't his show anymore. Trump's jaw tightened. "I've built businesses, I've created jobs. And I've seen you destroy trust," Denzel cut in, his voice steady but unyielding. "That's the difference between building something real and building a brand." The words landed heavy. For a second, Trump didn't speak. The audience leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Somewhere in the front row, a woman whispered, "This is history." The tension wasn't just growing, it was turning electric. This wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. Trump shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. The cameras caught it, the subtle tightening of his shoulders, the twitch in his jaw. He was no longer smiling. "You think you can sit here and question my patriotism?" he snapped, his voice louder now, carrying across the studio. "I've stood in front of dictators, I've signed deals that saved this country billions. And you? You've stood in front of cameras pretending to be a hero. The crowd reacted with a wave of gasps and low shouts. The tension wasn't simmering anymore, it was boiling. Denzel didn't blink. He leaned back slightly, hands clasped together on the table, and let Trump's words hang in the air. Then, with the measured tone of a man cutting straight to the bone, he said, "A hero isn't defined by who takes the credit, but by who takes the hits for someone else. You've made a career of dodging those hits, Mr. Trump." The room froze. Trump leaned forward, elbows on the table, pointing a finger directly at Denzel. "You don't know the first thing about sacrifice." That was it. Denzel's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. "Sacrifice," he repeated slowly. "I've sat with mothers who buried their children because they couldn't afford insulin. I've walked into neighborhoods where the American flag hangs in every window, but the government hasn't shown up in years. Don't tell me I don't know sacrifice. I've seen it. I've lived it. And I've fought for it, without needing my name in neon lights." The audience erupted into applause, shouts, and even a few whistles. The energy was uncontrollable. Trump tried to push back, his voice rising over the noise. "You're twisting facts to make yourself look good." Denzel leaned in just far enough for the cameras to catch the intensity in his eyes. "No, Mr. Trump. I'm telling the truth you don't want to hear. And that's what a patriot does." The host raised a hand, trying desperately to cut to a commercial, but the control room stayed on the shot. The director knew, this was too raw, too real to break. For the first time that night, Trump glanced toward the cameras, as if realizing the entire nation was watching this slip away from him. Trump straightened his tie, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He turned to the audience instead of Denzel, as if trying to reclaim control by sheer force of charisma. "Folks, you see what's happening here? This is the Hollywood elite telling you how to think, acting like they know your struggles because they played them in a movie." A ripple of applause came from one corner of the audience, but it was scattered, thin. Denzel didn't take his eyes off him. He waited for the noise to die before speaking. "The difference between you and me, Mr. Trump," Denzel began, his voice deep and deliberate, "is that I don't need to pretend to care about people when the cameras are rolling. I've been in their homes, I've listened without cutting them off, and I've seen the cost of leaders who care more about winning the moment than winning the fight for them." Trump's smile faltered. "Oh, please. Save the sermon. You don't run a country with feelings, you run it with results." Denzel leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "Results? Then explain why, under your watch, millions of Americans struggled to get basic health care. Why families in Puerto Rico waited months for disaster relief. Why veterans still sleep on the streets while tax breaks go to billionaires. Those are your results." The audience roared, half cheering, half booing, but all locked in. The host shifted in his chair, clearly torn between managing the chaos and letting history play out. Trump's voice sharpened. "I did more for this country than any president, and you know it. You're just here to score points for your side." "There's no side to feeding a hungry child," Denzel replied instantly. "There's no side to protecting our veterans, or making sure the elderly can afford their medicine. That's not politics. That's humanity. And if you think that's a partisan issue, maybe you're the one who's forgotten what patriotism looks like." The words hit like a punch, clean and undeniable. The room's noise swelled again, but under it, there was a new energy, one that wasn't there before. The audience wasn't just reacting, they were choosing. And Trump could feel it. Trump's hand slammed onto the table, the sound echoing through the studio. The audience gasped, and the host froze mid-breath. "I'm sick of you twisting everything I've done into some kind of failure," he barked, his face flushed. "You think you're the moral compass of America? You're just an actor reading lines someone else wrote." The crowd erupted. Half in cheers, half in outrage. The energy in the room was like static, crackling and dangerous. Denzel didn't flinch. He let Trump's words hang in the air just long enough for everyone to feel the weight of them. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, his voice low but every syllable razor-sharp. "I've read scripts, sure. But tonight, I'm not reading one. And you're not acting, you're revealing yourself. A patriot doesn't lose his temper when questioned. He answers with truth. What you've just shown America is that you can't handle being held accountable. The audience broke into wild applause, drowning out Trump's attempt to speak again. The camera zoomed in on Denzel, his face calm, his eyes locked on his opponent like a fighter who knows the knockout is coming. Trump's voice fought through the noise. You think you can stand there and judge me? You've never had to make the kind of decisions I've made. You're right, Denzel said, his tone cutting through the chaos like a blade. I've never had the power to decide who gets help and who gets left behind. But if I did, I'd sleep at night knowing I never left Americans behind to save my own image. The audience's cheers grew louder, some even standing to clap. Trump's jaw tightened, his knuckles white on the table's edge. The host raised a hand again, this time pleading, "Gentlemen, we need to." "No," Denzel interrupted, his voice steady, "the people watching at home need to hear this. They need to see the difference between someone who serves the country and someone who expects the country to serve them." The room went silent for a beat, eerily silent, before the next explosion of cheers. Trump's eyes darted toward the cameras, but it was too late. The moment belonged to Denzel. Trump shifted in his seat, tugging at his cufflinks as if the tiny motion could buy him time. The audience's energy had changed, he could feel it. No longer split down the middle, the cheers for him had grown faint, while Denzel's words seemed to land harder with each exchange. Denzel saw it too. He leaned back slightly, not to relax, but to command the space. His voice came out steady, carrying the weight of someone who wasn't here to win points, he was here to draw a line in the sand. "You've had the podium, the pulpit, the power," Denzel began, "and with all of it, you could have united people. But you chose division because it made the headlines bigger. You talk about patriotism, yet you can't stand in the same room with someone who disagrees without turning it into a fight." Trump tried to interject, "That's not." "No, let me finish," Denzel cut in sharply, the audience instantly backing him with a wave of applause. A patriot doesn't just wave the flag when it's convenient. He carries it through the mud, through the storms, through every hard choice. You've used it as a prop. The cameras panned across the audience, people nodding, some even mouthing, "That's right." Trump's jaw tensed. "You think you know patriotism better than me? I built this country back." "You built towers," Denzel said, his voice now cold and deliberate, "but you didn't build trust. You didn't build hope. And you sure didn't build a future for the people who needed it most." The crowd exploded, many on their feet, their cheers drowning out Trump's attempt to respond. The host glanced nervously at the control booth. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was a public turning point. Trump forced a smirk. "You're just doing this for the cameras." Denzel leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "I'm doing this for the people watching who've been told they don't matter unless they agree with the man in charge. And tonight, they can see that's a lie." The silence after that was deafening, and in it, the shift became undeniable. The room wasn't Trump's anymore. Trump's smile had thinned to a tight line. The bright studio lights seemed hotter now, the air heavier. He glanced toward the cameras again, seeking an ally in the lens, but all he saw staring back was a nation watching, waiting. Denzel leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low but carrying like a drumbeat. "You can't walk into a room thinking you own the conversation just because you've owned the headlines. Not here. Not with me." Trump sat back, trying to compose himself. "You love talking big, but you've never had to deal with the real weight of leadership. You've never." "I've carried weight you couldn't lift," Denzel shot back, his words sharp enough to cut through the air. "Not in the Oval Office, but in life. The weight of knowing when you speak for more than yourself. That's leadership. That's patriotism. And you've treated both like branding opportunities." The audience roared, but Denzel didn't let the sound break his focus. He locked eyes with Trump, holding the silence just long enough for it to sting. Trump's tone shifted, a trace of defensiveness creeping in. You act like you're the only one who loves this country. No, Denzel interrupted. I'm saying love for this country doesn't mean loving yourself in its reflection. It means putting its people above your pride, its future above your fame. For the first time, Trump didn't immediately respond. His fingers tapped against the table, restless, searching for a line that could win the room back. But the energy had already shifted beyond his reach. The host, sensing the imbalance, tried to throw him a lifeline. Mr. President, would you like to clarify? But Denzel wasn't finished. No, let him sit with it. Because for years, he's talked over anyone who challenged him. Tonight, he can hear the truth without interrupting it. The crowd erupted again, louder, more united. Even through the cameras, viewers could feel the momentum solidifying around Denzel. Trump adjusted his tie, his eyes narrowing. But the fight had left his voice. When he finally spoke, it sounded more like an excuse than a defense. And that's when the audience knew, Trump wasn't controlling this showdown anymore. Denzel straightened in his chair, the crowd's cheers fading into a focused hush. His eyes never left Trump. When he spoke, it wasn't rushed, it was deliberate, every word landing with the weight of a gavel. You've spent years convincing people that being loud is the same as being strong. That tearing someone down is the same as building a nation. That if you wrap something in the flag, it can't be questioned. But here's the truth, patriotism without integrity is just performance. The audience stirred, leaning in. Denzel's voice grew stronger. A real patriot doesn't just fight for the people who clap for him. He fights for the ones who boo, for the ones who doubt, for the ones who can't even see the fight because they're too busy trying to survive. You talk about the forgotten Americans, but you've forgotten them the second the cameras turned away. Trump's lips parted, but no sound came. The cameras caught the twitch of his jaw, the tightening of his hands on the table. I've walked through neighborhoods you only fly over, Denzel continued. I've seen kids pledge allegiance to a country that doesn't see them. And they still love it, still believe in it, because they think one day it'll love them back. That's the America I'm talking about. That's the one you keep failing. The applause started slowly, one person, then three, then half the room, until it rolled into a wave of standing ovations. Denzel paused, letting the noise swell before dropping his final blow. You keep saying you want to make America great again. I say, start by making it honest. The room erupted. Cameras flashed, the host's voice tried to cut in, but the crowd drowned him out. Trump shifted in his seat, forced to watch as the room, his room, belonged entirely to someone else. And in that moment, everyone could feel it, this wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Denzel leaned back, but it wasn't a gesture of retreat, it was the calm before the strike. The crowd, still buzzing from his last words, hushed as he adjusted his microphone and turned toward Trump with a steady, almost surgical gaze. All right, he began, his tone razor-sharp, let's strip away the slogans. Let's forget the rallies. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I want answers, not applause lines. Trump's eyes narrowed, but Denzel pressed on. Question 1, name one policy, just one, that put the people above your own political survival. Trump opened his mouth, but the pause was fatal. The audience could feel the scramble in his mind. Thought so, Denzel said, before moving in for the second strike. Question 2, in your years as president, can you name a single moment you admitted you were wrong, without blaming the media, the Democrats, or anyone else? Trump smirked, trying to regain footing. That's not how leadership works. No, Denzel cut in, that's exactly how leadership works. You own the failures as much as the victories. Otherwise, you're just selling a product, not leading a country. The crowd burst into applause. The host tried to interject, but Denzel raised a finger, he wasn't finished. Last question, Denzel said, leaning forward, voice dropping to a near whisper. If you lost the cheers, the cameras, the spotlight, would you still show up for the people? Or would America stop existing for you the second America stopped applauding? Trump shifted, his jaw tight, but there was no immediate comeback. The silence that followed was more devastating than any insult. Denzel let it hang, turning to the audience. That's the difference between a patriot and a performer. One fights for the people whether they're clapping or not. The other, he let his gaze drift back to Trump, only fights for the spotlight. The crowd exploded, rising to its feet. Even through the blinding studio lights, it was clear, Trump was cornered, and Denzel was holding the gavel. The standing ovation hadn't stopped. It wasn't the polite applause of a studio audience, it was raw, sustained, and deafening. Camera operators swiveled to catch the crowd's faces, some were shouting Denzel's name, others pounding the air with their fists. Denzel sat still for a moment, letting the noise wash over him. Then, in one slow, deliberate motion, he rose from his seat. The studio lights caught the edge of his suit, framing him like a silhouette against the storm. Trump stayed seated, his expression frozen between defiance and calculation, but the silence on his side of the room spoke volumes. He glanced toward the host, as if searching for a lifeline, but none came. Denzel turned to face the audience. Not just the people in the room, but the millions watching at home. His voice carried without strain. Patriotism isn't proven on a stage. It's proven when no one's watching. If you can't fight for people without the spotlight, then you're not serving the people. You're serving yourself. He let the words settle, the weight of them sinking into the air. Then, with a slight nod toward Trump, he added, "And America deserves better than that." The applause roared again, a wave so powerful it drowned out the host's closing remarks. Denzel didn't wait for the wrap-up. He stepped away from the desk, crossing the stage with measured strides, the sound of the crowd following him like a marching band. As he reached the studio doors, he paused, just for a heartbeat, then looked over his shoulder. Trump was still at the table, flanked by the lights and the cameras, but suddenly smaller, like the stage itself had shifted under him. Denzel gave a final, almost imperceptible smile, then pushed the door open and walked out. The cameras followed, capturing his exit in a single, unbroken shot that would loop endlessly online within hours. By the time the broadcast ended, hashtags were already trending worldwide, #YourNoPatriot. Clips of his words flooded every platform, and political pundits on both sides couldn't stop replaying the moment. For Trump, the silence after Denzel's departure was heavier than any speech. For Denzel, it was the sound of victory. Patriotism isn't about winning arguments, it's about winning trust. If you only show up when the cameras are rolling, you're not a patriot, you're a performer. And America deserves more than a performance.